The House Committee on Natural Resources, Environment, Tourism, and Outdoor Recreation will come to order. Would the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Poleski.
Here.
Representatives Hill.
Here.
Shannon. Present. Arvin. McFall.
Here.
Pies.
Present.
Martin.
Here.
Preston.
Here.
Shriver.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have 8 members present, a quorum.
Thank you very much. Representative Martin moves to approve the minutes from a previous meeting on June 8th. Hearing no objection, the minutes are approved. So first up, we are going to be taking a vote on Senate Bill 52, which was sponsored by Senator Cherry. We heard testimony on May 25th, May 25th committee hearing. We do have an amendment. Let me do this first. Okay. First off, I'm going to read in a card. We have supporting the bill but not wishing to speak, Taylor Ritterbush from the DNR. And that is all we have on that one. So we do have an amendment. Let me make sure I'm grabbing the right one, everyone. From Representative Preston. Do you want to talk to or speak to your amendment?
Part of the issue is processors throughout the Upper Peninsula as well as Northern Michigan that engage in deer processing already collect a tremendous amount of data regarding deer harvesting. In my mind, it's just duplicative. A lot of the data is already there. Why it hasn't been used thus far, and I'm really concerned about the industry going forward. People becoming involved in it, and this just further exacerbating people's interest in deer hunting and taking part in natural resources and harvesting of game in Michigan.
Okay. And would you like to move your amendment?
Please.
All right, Representative Preston moves her amendment. Mr. Clerk, please call the vote.
On the motion to adopt the amendment, Chair Poleski.
No.
Representatives Hill.
No.
Shannon.
No.
Arvin. McFall.
No.
Forgot he wasn't here.
Pies.
No.
Martin.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Shriver.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 3 yeas, 5 nays, no pass. The amendment is not adopted.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. There being no further amendments, I move that we vote out Senate Bill 52 with recommendation. Motion made by Representative McFall. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
On the motion to report, Chair Poleski.
Yes.
Representatives Hill.
Yes.
Shannon.
Yes.
Arvin. McFall.
Yes.
Pies.
Yes.
Martin.
No.
Preston.
Yes.
Shriver.
No.
Madam Chair, 6 yeas, 2 nays, no pass. Senate Bill 52 is reported with recommendation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clerk. Next up, we will be voting on Senate Bill 14, sponsored by Senator McCann. We heard testimony on this bill during June 8th. We have one card to read in. Not wishing to speak and opposing the bill is Jacob Manning from the Small Business Association of Michigan. We have one amendment and one substitute. Is the amendment to?
Amendments to the bill as it is.
Okay, great. So we have an amendment offered by Representative Preston. Would you like to speak to this amendment?
Yes, thank you. Federal guidelines are already accepted throughout the country as a standard, and my amendment simply states that if our unemployment rate reaches a level that's just revealing a lack or a deficit in productivity in the state, that we relook at this and defer to federal guidelines rather than maybe the overburdensome state guidelines, just allowing an outlet or a mechanism to come into place, should we find ourselves in a position where the state's being more egregious than the federal standard.
Thank you very much. And you move your amendment?
Please.
Representative Preston moves her amendment. Mr. Clerk, please call the vote.
On the motion to adopt, Chair Poleski.
No.
Representatives Hill.
No.
Shannon.
No.
Arvin. McFall.
No.
Pies.
No.
Martin.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Shriver. No.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 2 yeas, 6 nays, no pass. The amendment is not adopted.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Next up, we have a substitute for SB 14 that is being offered by Vice Chair Martin. Would you like to speak to your substitute?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, it goes to economic development. All we want to do is, currently, we already have this provision, like to leave it there. that if you do want to go stricter than the federal rules, you just have to notify why that rule is, why you would want to increase it to protect, of course, Michigan resources. And if it is approved by oversight, then it would go ahead and occur anyway. Thank you.
And do you move your substitute?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move my substitute.
Representative Martin moves his substitute. Mr. Clerk, will you please take the vote?
On the motion to adopt the substitute, Chair Prohatsky.
No.
Representatives Hill.
No.
Shannon.
No.
Arbit. McFall.
No.
Pies.
No.
Martin.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Shriver.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 2 yeas, 6 nays, no pass. The substitute is not adopted.
Mr. Clerk, with that being said, Representative Pies makes a motion to take the vote on Senate Bill 14 with recommendation. Mr. Clerk, please call the vote.
On the motion to report, Chair Prohatsky.
Yes.
Representatives Hill.
Yes.
Shannon.
Yes.
Arbit. McFall.
Yes.
Pies.
Yes.
Martin.
No.
Preston.
No.
Shriver.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 5 yeas, 3 nays, no pass. Senate Bill 14 is reported with recommendation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clerk. The final bill that we're going to be voting on today is House Bill 4596, which was sponsored by Representative Menser. We heard testimony at our June 8th meeting, but we do have today an H4 substitute before the committee, and I believe that Ben Polson is here to speak to the substitute. Thank you, Ben. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. I'm not going to ruin anyone's lunch going over why this bill is necessary. Just after you heard testimony on this legislation, Rep. Menser has been working with members of the nonwoven fabric industry in order to strengthen this legislation. The result of that work is this substitute in front of you. The substitute makes changes in 3 areas. It replaces the defined terms in the Act with the terms covered product and label notice. These changes brings the bill in line with the other bills that have been adopted in other states, and also the do not flush legislation that has been proposed at the national level. This just helps clarify what products are being covered. The definition of the terms in the bill remains the same. The substitute also adds language clarifying the requirements for bulk packaging and combination product packaging. This just ensures that in a combination product, such as like a mop with a wipe, that the wipes are the ones being labeled with the do not flush packaging. Finally, it also allows for delays due to the label approval process. Certain wipes that are regulated by the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act must have their labels approved by the EPA. This sub would require that those wipes submit a compliant label by February 1st, 2025, and then adopt that label as it is approved by the EPA. Those are the changes. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Does anyone have any questions?
What are the repercussions if the feds don't get back to them by 2025? I mean, holdups on the federal side are.
Right. So the intent is to not punish any manufacturers who are being delayed due to the holdup on the federal side. So they would have to submit a compliant label and then just adopt it as soon as it is approved. There is not included in the sub any penalties, for not adopting a compliant label if the feds have not approved one.
And just a follow-up, is there subjectively any penalties that could be applied? Which departments overseeing this?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Is there any subjective penalties that could be applied to them if they weren't in compliance by 2025? And who's enforcing that?
I do not believe so, but I'd have to look into that and get back to you.
All right.
Are there any further questions? All right. Thank you very much, Ben. We appreciate your time. We do have one card to read in. Not wishing to speak and supporting the bill is Nick Acapinti from the Michigan League of Conservation Voters. So we are going to vote to adopt the substitute. Representative Shannon moves to adopt the H4 substitute to House Bill 4596. Mr. Clerk, will you take the vote?
On the motion to adopt, Chair Prohatsky.
Yes.
Representatives Hill.
Yes.
Shannon.
Yes.
Arbit. McFall.
Yes.
Pies.
Yes.
Martin.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Shriver.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 1 nay, no pass. The substitute is adopted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clerk. And now I will take a motion to report HB 4596 as sub H4 with recommendation. Motion made by Vice Chair Hill. Mr. Clerk, please call the vote.
On the motion to report, Chair Pohutsky.
Yes.
Representatives Hill.
Yes.
Shannon.
Yes.
Arbit. McFall.
Yes.
Pies.
Yes.
Martin.
Pass.
Preston.
Pass.
Shriver.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 5 yeas, 1 nay, 2 pass. House Bill 4596 reported as substitute H4 with recommendation.
Thank you very much. All right, last but certainly not least on the agenda, we're joined today by representatives from Michigan's Indigenous community who have come to present to us. So first, I would like to invite Dr. Nicole Kiwe-Biber from the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Ottawa Indians to speak, and she is joining us on Zoom. Dr. Biber, please feel free to take over.
Can you hear me fine?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Minogajika, Nicole Kiwe-Biber, Indigenous Straganashamuan, Obananong na Dago, Mishikid Dodam, Nakojigo on the Dojaba, Waganakasino Dawa, Nishanabekwe. So my English name is Nicole Kiwe-Biber. I'm a tribal citizen of the Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa, and I'm a Turtle Clan. So I want to thank you, Chair Pohutsky, and all of our esteemed members of the House Committee on Natural Resources for inviting us as tribal citizens and also Michigan citizens from our respective nations. I've come in this, I just want to start by saying the seats that you occupy right now in terms of considering matters related to what's referred to as natural resources are really critical to whether or not our people are going to be able to practice our spirituality, our teachings, our traditions, to carry those on and pass them along to our children. Because the thing is, if we, behind me with this birch, with the cedar, everything else, for us to be able to reconnect with our language, for us to have our stories, for us to have our ceremonies, we need the presence of these plants, of the waters that are clean, and all the animals that are attached to them and the stories and teachings those animals carry. So, you know, that gets into quite a lot of depth in terms of tribal consultation, in terms of our treaties, and thinking even as recently as 1978, Indian Religious Freedom Act, we can't practice our spirituality if we don't have these relatives and we don't know that the decisions being made are going to enable that thriving and survival. I'd also like to introduce as context this really lengthy list, 19 pages long, very small print of lists, and it's filed with the Secretary of State March 20th, 2023 from the DNR, and it's the Threatened and Endangered Species list. This is a long list, and it actually doesn't even include some of the what we call relatives whose numbers are very far down from what they once were. But it includes enough for us to, I think, begin from a spot where I would like to share with you from the 2002 Government to Government Accord between State of Michigan and federally recognized Indian tribes. So in part 3 of that, the guiding principles, the State of Michigan acknowledges that, I'll quote, the development of strong, reliable government to government relations between the State of Michigan and the tribes will be beneficial to all of the citizens of Michigan. And also in guiding principles, the tribes acknowledge that the development of strong, reliable government to government relationships between the tribes and the State of Michigan will be beneficial to all of the citizens of Michigan. A list like this is not beneficial to all the citizens of Michigan. I've already sort of tried to contextualize how it certainly is not beneficial to us as tribal people, tribal nations who are looking to recover and reinvigorate and continue the restoration of our teachings and our cultural practices. But for every citizen of Michigan, I mean, I'm up here right now in Leelanau County. It's beautiful here. And I think when we take the time and really appreciate what we have here, we can agree it helps a lot. It helps us mentally. It helps us all to carry on and with the things that we care most about. And to really think about what legacy we'd like to leave our children, every citizen of Michigan. Now, if we think, you know, a lot of the time when maybe these sort of committees are held, things are associated with natural resources, a lot of times there's no questions. When the tribal perspective is raised, there's not a question. And already that sort of answers that there's an implicit question that's been answered of what's considered valid, what's considered consequential, what's considered helpful in attaining a given goal. So if we think about what the goal is, well, if it's no limits on development, if it's what's going to be most profitable, if it's looking in terms of like how are these resources able to be exploited as part of always just the economic question, well, I think that gets us to a point where we have a list like this, where we are collectively witnessing this mass extinction. If, however, we ground things in the traditional ecological knowledge, well, that's grounded in the reality of our common dependency on these life systems. So, you know, you received quite a few previous tribal resolutions, statements, stances, unequivocally uphold the importance of these lives, the necessity. So, you know, for among our Anishinaabe and then Obijigun, our ancestors, you know, the framing of this in terms of traditional ecological knowledge, think about that incredibly complex interweaving of experiential science, spiritual relationships, illustrative storytelling, stewardship responsibilities. They're deeply rooted and place specific, right? So, you know, this is the heart of Turtle Island. That's what we call this Great Lakes area. And so, you know, we have a seven grandfather teachings, the Busandizuin. So I'll uplift that today. And that's humility. And that's not thinking of ourselves in terms of a hierarchy, that we're at the highest. There's assumed dominion. We have to think of ourselves as lower because we're dependent. And it's not like we're minimizing and insulting ourselves. It's with that understanding that in the human family, we're dependent. And that's an opportunity for stewardship. It's an opportunity for gratitude. Because those plant and animal nations, they came before us. They're the original caretakers. They're why we have this inheritance at all. So, you know, it's that abundance that they stewarded for so long. That's our honor and responsibility to continue on stewarding. So it takes that humility to Busandizuin to view Mayingan, the wolf, as an elder brother, to be esteemed and respected. Teresa's going to talk a bit more in depth about Mayingan and about that relationship. And we want to highlight that because it seems that is the fate of those wolves and of Mayingan is often considered the most controversial and very difficult to touch politically. And I think it's really interesting that the relationship between Mayingan and the Anishinaabe, that's a really necessary and valuable frame for what it means to ground policies and decisions in that fertile ground of traditional ecological knowledge. And that's going to take a shift, and it's going to take some courage, but also realize a lot of benefits come from that. These animals, they're our teachers and our guides, and we're proud of that. And for Mayingan in particular, you know, there's a lot of worry about the overabundance of deers downstate. Well, without their predators, that balance is upset. In the UP, you don't have so much disease. The deer might be a little warier, but they find their balance, and Maingan's necessary. So, this is the context we find ourselves in with this list. It's of utmost urgency. And, we can only begin the recovery and restoration when the original wounds aren't repeatedly reopened by ongoing devaluation and exploitation of our other than human relatives. All lives depend on clean water and that living, thriving earth. And that's completed by the biodiversity, which determines the quality of every breath we take. So I'll ask you to open your minds and hearts as we turn to the language.
Thank you, Dr. Biber. Does anyone have any questions at this time for Dr. Biber? Representative Hill.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. I wondered if it would be possible to get a copy of the list you were referring to. I'm not sure of the process, how this works, of how that information is shared with the members of the committee. I just wanted to make sure we could receive it in a future time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll be glad to get that list to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Biber. Next up, joining us on Zoom is Teresa Pitts from the Keweenaw Bay Indian Community. Ms. Pitts, you are free to start whenever you're ready.
Bonjour. Teresa Pitts, Indigenous Cause, Jaganashimo, Wabishki Wabikonikwe, Indigo Ojibwe Anishinaabe Kwayandao, Magazian Dodem, Kakiwe Onaning, Indunjaba, Gaye and Da, Wikwe Donkindabendagos. Hello, my name is Teresa Pitts. The spirits know me as Wabishki Wabikonikwe. I am Eagle Clan. I was born in the Keweenaw, and I live here as well, and I'm a member of the Keweenaw Bay Indian Community. KBIC is located on the L'Anse Indian Reservation in Baraga, Marquette, and Ontonagon counties in the Upper Peninsula along Lake Superior. The Treaty of 1854 between the Lake Superior Chippewa and the United States government established the L'Anse Reservation. Our reservation includes over 59,000 acres and is both the oldest and largest reservation in the state of Michigan. I'd like to preface my comments today with a short narrative relative to our topics this morning. What I'm about to read is the work of Professor and author Dr. Wendy McCoonts-Genius from her 2009 title, Our Knowledge is Not Primitive, Decolonizing Botanical Anishinaabe Teachings. This passage was made part of KBIC's Wildlife Stewardship Plan, which is a living document first published in 2014. A copy of which can be provided to you upon request. Long ago, when the earth was young, all the beings of creation knew who they were and what was expected of them. There were those who lived in the outer air, including the Benashiak, the birds, and the winged ones who fly around the earth. There were those who lived in the waters, such as the Giguyak, the fish, and the Mashikayak, the turtles. There were those who lived beneath the earth, those who lived in the ground, and those who burrowed beneath the earth for periods of time. There were also those who lived on the earth. All the beings of the creation knew that they were supposed to take care of one another, for all parts of creation are interconnected and dependent on one another to keep the balance of the earth. Next, if I may shift hats, I'd like to now share with you select excerpts from comments submitted by the Keweenaw Bay Indian Community to the state of Michigan during the review and revision of the State Wolf Management Plan. These comments were submitted in writing on January 7th, 2022, and signed by Gary F. Lunsfoot Jr., Vice President. KBIC has granted me permission as a tribal citizen to present this here today, though not as government-to-government consultation. In addition to recognizing our treaties with the federal government, we honor our first treaty with all orders of creation, which includes our obligations and connections to the natural environment. It is our responsibility to speak for those that do not have a voice in the Council of Men. Ojibwe teachings from the creation story and other teachings are clear that Maingan is a brother with whom the fate of the people is intertwined. As such, the tribe's goal for the Maingan population is to be healthy and in balance with the other more than human beings in the world. The tribes will respect the responsibility they accepted in their treaty with Maingan, consider and act upon their best interests, and be appreciative and humble in accepting the gifts Mainganuk provide. Population goal. Wolves hold an irreplaceable role and function in the ceded territories. They are critical to maintaining the long-term health of the deer herd by removing sick, injured, and weak individuals. Their impacts on the distribution and behavior of deer also helps protect important medicinal plants from overbrowsing. They may play an important role in reducing the level of tick-borne diseases. These and other values, including ones which humans have yet to learn, reinforces the need to have wolves on the landscape in all areas of suitable habitat. The Anishinaabe cultural values of wolves also supports the idea that wolves have intrinsic values and a right to occupy their traditional lands. The combined ecological and cultural teachings indicate that Mainganuk should be allowed to determine their own natural level of abundance on the landscape and to decide their general distribution of range. This goal respects Mainganuk and allows them to fulfill their treaty with the Anishinaabe. Only when the Maingan population is at its full natural level is it able to provide all of the benefits, often called ecological services in Western language, upon which the tribes depend. Education and outreach. Oh, I'm sorry, my screen has. Falsehoods and misunderstandings continue to cloud wolf stewardship and often result in unfounded actions in state management plans. While wolf plans uniformly recognize the great need for education, not only of the public, but of political leaders, implementation of education efforts often falls short of recognized needs. Sound educational outreach efforts should be a priority in wolf plans, should be adequately funded, and should include tribal perspectives. As co-stewards, managers of this landscape, we look forward to opportunities to work together to change public perceptions about Maingan and contribute to monitoring efforts to ensure Mainganuk will persist and thrive within the Great Lakes region for generations to come. Additionally, Maingan remains protected within the KBIC Tribal Code under Endangered Species and Protected Animals. KBIC has been monitoring wolves on and near the L'Anse Reservation since 2007 and adopted a wolf management plan in 2013. The vision, mission of the KBIC plan is maintaining a healthy, self-sustaining population of wolves within the KBIC home territory, thus preserving the cultural and ecological benefits for the next 7 generations and beyond. The plan is written to encourage cooperation among agencies, communities, private and corporate landowners, special interest groups, and all Michigan residents. Our plan is currently under revision, including a change to the title of the plan from using the word management to stewardship. We would encourage the state to consider changing the title of their plan as well. As the state plan currently reads, it does not make specific management recommendations. The focus is a discussion of ways in which the state can work with partners and stakeholders to maintain a viable population of wolves across the landscape, suggesting a conservation plan versus a management plan. In closing, Keweenaw Bay Indian Community encourages the Michigan Legislature to consult with tribal governments directly. Miigwech Bisandawye. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Are there any questions for Teresa at this time? Rep. McFall?
I appreciate your testimony today, and I'm not really sure if this is a question for you or not, but like all of the supporting paperwork mentions House Bill 5834. Do we have a copy of that? Because we looked on the...
I believe that's a previous
Okay.
legislature's.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Rep. Pies?
Thank you. Yes, we were over here trying to find HB 5834, and I found it online, although it doesn't say what year it's from. But as I recall, at least several years ago, this issue came up and for legislation, and I thought it had been voted on. Is that not correct? And it's not correct. I see a shaking head here. So even though this says HB 5834 then, you're speaking with us then is just not quite a heads up, but just to let us know your take on
There's
this, should something come
Rep.
up.
Pies, there's like pretty consistently ongoing conversations
Yes.
that are like often very heated for, some of the reasons that were outlined here, and then, perspectives from some folks from the UP too. So while that bill is pretty old, this is kind of a perennial issue, I'd say, that comes up at some point during the term. So,
All right, thank you.
any further questions? Thank you very much, Teresa. Appreciate your time.
Miigwech.
Next up, I would like to invite Doug Craven, who is the director of the Natural Resources Department for the Little Traverse Bay of Odawa Indians, who is joining us in person. Thank you so much, Doug. Can you adjust, there's a red button.
How's this?
Perfect,
Better?
thank you.
Yeah, so I appreciate the invite here and the opportunity to speak. Ani Ejijak and Dodom Wakanuxing Odawa and Ada, Doug Craven Indigenous. My name is Doug Craven. I'm a Little Traverse Bay Bands Odawa Indians tribal member and a member of the Crane Clan as well. So I appreciate Nicole Biber, Dr. Biber's starting us off here, and Teresa as well. I just like to add in a little bit. Certainly want to be respectful of your time here today and inviting us out here. What I like to speak a little bit about is just some of the opportunities that I think there are between tribal communities and the state of Michigan in terms of management, in terms of developing a better process. There are tribes within the state that have recognized treaty rights. Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians is one of the 5 tribes that are part of USV Michigan. We have recognized co-management authority on the Great Lakes. We also have inland authority as well within that area. And that's a pretty big portion of the state of Michigan, basically a line from Grand Rapids up to Alpena, and then pretty much in the eastern part of the Upper Peninsula, so from Marquette down to Escanaba. So it's quite a large area. It's all a part of 38 counties. And so we like to just bring forward here, I just want to add on to some of the things that the other speakers presented, is that there can be a little bit of a difference, certainly in how tribes manage natural resources and how we view natural resources, and sometimes those can allow or arise to some conflict, I think, just from that misunderstanding. Generally speaking, tribes are looking at resources from a standpoint that was mentioned earlier by Teresa in a more of a relationship type of a process as opposed to a purely extractive process. So there's a recognition of plants, animals, their involvement in the world here, and that really caters how we put together regulations, that caters to how we put together management plans, that affects how we view the world in terms of that. That doesn't mean it's contrary or is antithetical to goals or objectives that the state has. Can it just allow us to be talking past each other from time to time? And so it's a good these are good opportunities, I think, to bring that forward. One of the things that we really look at also is harvesting resources from an efficiency standpoint. So from most tribal communities, we don't have a thrill of the hunt, or we're not designing our regulations for a sporting chance. We're designing our regulations in recognition of those opportunities that they're looking to get in and get a resource via spearing a certain species of fish, for example, or using gill nets to harvest those in an efficient manner and then to move on with their day, that they're respectful of those species as opposed to more of an experience where you're prolonging that opportunity directly through regulation, directly through some sort of process there. So that can be a little bit of a difference there in how we approach those. But the basis of that is that respectful relationship that we have, and that we're viewing those resources not from a pleasure or kind of creating this opportunity, but it's for a set purpose, subsistence need, ceremonial uses, those types of things. Additionally, I think one of the things that was touched on a little bit earlier today is that we also have a principle of a 7-generational approach. So we're trying to develop regulations, we're trying to develop policies, we're trying to develop these plans moving forward that are recognition of 7 generations forward. That can be an abstract term, and sometimes that makes it difficult for us to have conversations with our state and federal partners. But the essence of it is that we're putting together things now that we realize that we won't benefit from, and our children won't necessarily benefit, our immediate children, and our grandchildren won't. It'll be individuals, certainly that'll be related, part of our community, but we won't know them. So we don't have a vested interest per se in acquiring wealth or doing something that is immediate. We're looking at the long-term benefit of that resource, of the community in that regard. One of the ways that it helps drive that home to me is that my generation, we are beneficiaries of the 1836 Treaty of Detroit. That was a treaty that the Cora tribes signed, or Chippewa Auto Resource tribes signed. Within that, Article 13, we stipulated the right to hunt and other usual privileges of occupancy until the land was required for settlement. That led to US v. Michigan. That led to us establishing and having our treaty rights protected in perpetuity moving forward. I'm the 7th generation from those ancestors that made those decisions. And so I can put it in that context that they certainly aren't around. They don't know people, their kids, what have you, weren't part of that. But I benefited from that. And so that's a little bit of a way of explaining that terminology in that. A couple other things I'd like just to touch on is that tribes are resources, and I think there's opportunity here within the state, certainly for the tribes and the state to work a little bit more efficiently through legislation, by cleaning up a few things that make it a little bit hard for tribes in the state to work together on certain issues. But also recognizing that tribes do have expertise, that we do have financial resources to a certain degree, obviously not as much as the state of Michigan or the federal government, but there's opportunities there for us to co-manage together, for us to work cooperatively together on certain issues. Whitefish in Michigan here is in a precipitous decline. It's an iconic species. It's very important to commercial and subsistence fishermen of the Great Lakes, specifically the tribes, as part of our creation story. In addition to having these other significance, we really need a lot of help from a lot of resources right now to address that issue, and that's going to take some direct funding. That's going to take some direct movement in that regard. The other thing I'd like to point out as well is Dr. Barber, you mentioned it, is TEK, so traditional ecological knowledge. That can be abstract as well and hard to conceptualize. Again, I think there's another opportunity there through policy, through legislation or otherwise, to open the door that when the state is putting together management plans, regulations, legislation, that we are following a meaningful consultation process. There is an executive order that Governor Whitmer has that could use some tweaking. We're not advocating for specific legislation in that regards, but it has often been difficult and maybe not utilized to its fullest extent. But there's an opportunity with consultation to have some of these discussions. And when we specify meaningful consultation, we're talking about consultation on the front end, not at the end. So not when a piece of legislation or a policy or a regulation is developed and then you put it out for a 30-day comment period and then you allow tribes or the general public to comment. Often those turn into a duly noted, kind of a box check marked, and nothing changes from that piece of legislation or those regulations. We're looking at having meaningful consultation on the front end, so this co-development, this co-creation of these policies, of these regulations, of these management plans, or legislation even, that allows for that. And as a part of that, TEK can be incorporated into that on that front end. There is concern within, I think, tribal communities on sharing traditional ecological knowledge. There has been over time, more of an extractive process between non-tribal individuals, anthropologists, otherwise that come to our communities, take stories, take other things, publish a book, create an article to promote their agenda, and really the tribal community doesn't benefit from that. So there is hesitancy on sharing some of that knowledge in those contexts, but there's value to those. And one example I'll give quickly before we move on, I don't want to take up too much of your time, is a term that we have is Manitou, Manitou chants. So Manitou is spirit, can sometimes be considered the great spirit, those types of things. Aunts, if you see aunts on the end of a suffix of a Anishinaabe-Moan word, usually means small. Miigwan is feather, Miigwants means small feather, little feather. So Manitou chants is the name that we have for things that are small, things that we can't see. It's more general, but it's bugs, it's microorganisms, it's those types of things. The reason I bring that up is that within our tribal community, we recognize that there's an importance to those beings, those small things that are there. And now we're finding that through modern science is catching up to a certain degree, that if you go through and you have high intensity burns and that denudes the soil, and if you go in and you try to put in a tree similar to planting corn or some other crop, it doesn't do well. That's because that microorganism environment was affected by that high burn, or was affected by a clear cut that the sun scalded the soil. And so there's a recognition now that if you're recreating those environments, you really have to foster that microorganism community. And one of the things that I think drives that home is that tribes knew that we had that significance, that symbiotic relationship between the soil, those microorganisms, those fungi communities, the trees, the plants, the animals that we have. Those were all important. But it's taken a long time for modern science to catch up to that and understand and appreciate that. The last thing I'd just like to just close on here again is just emphasizing that I believe that there's opportunities. The tribes are really looking at a variety of things in the state of Michigan. One is elk expansion. We have real interest in working collaboratively with the state on pursuing and taking a look at opportunities to expand elk opportunities within the state of Michigan. Obvious whitefish are a big issue that we feel we need to work collaboratively on. And then there are some conservation law enforcement areas that we'd like to see some improvement in legislation to allow us to work cooperatively better. Right now it's kind of split between the Great Lakes and inland. There's different things set aside there in authorities, so we really want to try to clean that up through some legislation as well. And then the last thing is non-game species management. One of the things that I think Nicole mentioned, and as part of that list, is that we have culturally significant species that we spend a lot of time working on, one of which is eagle, Magize. It's very highly revered within our tribal communities. We spend a lot of time on monitoring eagle populations. They're no longer on the endangered species list. However, they still need some management and research dedicated to them so that they can properly be managed. The state of Michigan funding process is set up such that non-game species really get little to no funding at all. And so there has really not been any cooperative work from the state side in terms of Magize management since they came off the endangered species list in 2006. So that's another thing that we'd like to see, some movement towards is, looking for allowing funding structures such that these non-game species, these other species, can have some cooperative management through some dedicated funding to that. So, Chi-miigwech, I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Doug. Are there any questions for Doug? No? Thank you very much for your time, and thank you to all of our presenters and for the folks that helped organize it. I felt that since so much of what we deal with here in this committee has a direct impact on the Indigenous community, and it's not a voice that we frankly bring to the table very often, I wanted to make sure that we heard from you all and understood that it's not just a matter of, as was pointed out, economic gain or loss. It's a spiritual, religious, cultural significance. So thank you all for your time and for your presentations. I greatly appreciate it. Representative McFall moves to excuse absent members. There being no objection, absent members are excused, and there being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned.